Hey everyone, my name is Jacob, and in this Godot tutorial I'm going to teach you how I like to approach RPG items in the Godot engine. I'm going to save a lot of my intro information to the end of this video, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stick around for that. That meant a lot to me. But without further ado, let's go ahead and leap right into this tutorial. So first off, a lot of people will approach items in video games with a JSON approach. They'll make a JSON file and just use a lot of copying and pasting to build onto that, or they'll spend time making a separate tool to then make new items. This is inherently kind of a time waster, at least in my eyes. So Godot Engine has a few cool features that you can leverage to make items very easily and use object-oriented techniques to make them work in your favor. So first off, let's go ahead and make a folder, and let's name this items, or item, that works too. Make a subfolder called classes. One that's a repo. And now in classes, let's go ahead and make a script. So this script will inherit from type resource. And I'm gonna go ahead and call this item class. So this is the main file, and if you've never used resources before in Godot Engine, they have some differences from anything that extends node or control or anything like that. They can't be used visually, but they can hold a lot of data and they can be saved really easily with a resource saver. It's very good for data, and in my own personal games, I like to use them for everything from dialogues to items to quests. So first, let's start with some data that we want to add to any items. These are all going to be exported variables so that you can access them from the editor itself. Let me zoom in a little bit so that it's easier to see. And here we go. Let's go ahead and make a string. This item name now can be called out in any file. Let's also make something like an integer that's a quantity, because we have to know how many items are in a stack. And let's move on to also say maybe hover text, kind of a tooltip that in your inventory, when you click on it or right click on it and then select different information about it, then you'll know whatever you want to write in there. So put hover text in here. And finally, maybe we should put in a texture. Oops, that's not all capitals. Everybody makes mistakes. Go ahead and make a texture for the sprite itself. Now this will be visible from the inventory and things like that. Now that we have these 4 variables, we have an item class. So let's go ahead and name our class. The one thing to keep in mind about class names, which this may go over your head if you're new to Godot, but maybe bookmark this and come back to it to refresh yourself later, is that classes will be compiled after singletons, which means that you're going to run into an error of cyclic dependency if you call out your singleton in the items, or vice versa. I can show you how to get around that at a later date, but for now we're just going to keep going, leave the singletons out of this, and leave this just to items themselves. So now we have our base item class. Let's go ahead and make a resource of this item. Search for item. Here we go, item class. I'll hit this little star up here to put in my favorites. Then go up a layer and go to my repo. Now this is where I'll store all my item files. And let's go ahead and name this carpet. Easy enough. Now let's go ahead and name this cookie. Now in my repository, I have a cookie. Beautiful, and you can see on this right side in the inspector, you can see all these different variables. You see my item name, you see my item texture, my quantity, and my hover text. In the item name, I'll go ahead and put cookie. And I'm gonna drag in a cookie texture from my game that I've been working on that I'll tell you about at the end of this video, so stay tuned. Here's my cookie PNG, put that right in there. Quantity, I'll just put 1. And for my hover text, I'll say, this delicious chocolate chip cookie reminds you of simpler times. So now we have our cookie. What if we wanted to have different variables, like health restored? Well, the problem inherently is that any items that inherit from item class will have this value, and you don't want armor or weapons to have a health restored value. And another beauty that you may have noticed about resources and classes in this way is that whenever you change the script, the resource itself will update, which means that you don't have to go back through all of your items and add this variable. It'll already be there for you, and all your data will already be saved. So what we're gonna do, let's remove that line. We're gonna make a new script. This one, however, is going to inherit from item class instead of resource. And this one will be a food item class. Now we're going to go ahead and make this class itself food item. And we're gonna replace all of this with some new export variables. Let's go ahead and add that line in. I'm gonna misspell this a little bit, change the caps, but you know what? Accidents happen. So now we have a health restored value, but in our cookie, we don't have this. So let's go ahead and make another resource. Let's make this a food item, and let's go ahead and star this as well. I'll make this new cookie. How about that? And from here, we can say new cookie. Let's drag in the texture because we only want to use 1. Quantity, hover text, we'll say it's Yum Town. And now it does have this value health restored, but as you can see, the old cookie does not have health restored. So we don't even need this old cookie anymore. Let's go ahead and delete that. We have our new cookie. We can say it restores 2 health. Beautiful, right? Now, anything that inherits from food item class. So if you want to add different categories of foods, like maybe drinks, you could have alcoholic beverages in your drink that make your character tipsy and might lower your energy for the day. You could have that, and then all of your food items rather, like this cookie, for instance, wouldn't need to take away that energy. So, cool. What if we want to make a different kind of item again? Let's go ahead and make, not a resource, another script. So let's make an armor class. Change it to no comments this time. I like having no comments on, but if you're new to Godot, it's kind of nice to have those on there. So, armor. This extends from item class, so it will hold all of the other variables from item class, but not the ones from food item class. So let's go ahead and call out this class name. Make it armor item. Let's make it an integer variable, and let's say defense. And this is important because all of your armor, maybe you want to have different defense values against various types of damage. So let's make a new resource already. Let's call it armor item. There we go, it's right there. All I have to do is search for it, and then I put it in my favorites since I'll be making a few. Let's make a white shirt. Plain white tee, if you will. Now, this plain white tee does not have the value for health restored, but it does have the value for defense. So let's go ahead and fill this all in. For the item texture, I'll go ahead and pull a shirt. And this is just a PNG that I made in a Sprite. Quantity, I'll make 1, and defense, let's make it 3. So if an enemy hits, the damage will be reduced by 3. So fantastic. Now we have these items, and I like to maybe make a folder for the different assets. So I'll put all of them in there, and the textures still hold all of these. Awesome. If you're not familiar with different export types, I highly recommend looking up the different export types. In my own games, I use all different kinds of export types, and I do like multi-lines for things like big amounts of text, because then you can see this massive string that you can be putting in. Integers are easy. You can do floats, you can do ranges for these, like if you wanted the quantity to be anywhere from 2 to 5 on an item, then you can't go below 2 and you can't go below 5. So that can be nice for different things, where you have like ranges within an item of things. So anyway, you see your items in here. Let's close assets to clean everything up. Now you can make items. But what do you do with those? Well, I like to make item sprites. So what I'm gonna do is make a folder for sprites. Then I'm gonna make a new scene this time. This one's going to be an item sprite. This would be, you can make it either a 2D scene or a UI scene. In this case, I'm going to make it a UI scene. I will change this type to a texture rect. And change what its name is to item sprite. Now, let's attach a script. It'll already have item sprite in there, and it'll extend texture rect. So the main purpose of this item sprite is to hold these different item resources. So let's go ahead and make an export resource. Now this is a special variable, and if you'll remember, the item class extends from type resource, and since the food item and the armor item both extend from that, that means that they hold all that data, and ultimately they are that class. These are going to various object-oriented techniques, so if you're not familiar with that, you can look those up, or you can just trust me, take me at my word. Let's name this my item. So now we have an item sprite, and you can see it has my item there. So let's go ahead and say that this item will be a white shirt. So we can just drag it from our file system right in there, and now we have white shirt. Awesome. Cool. Let's go ahead and make a text label. I'm gonna make a rich text label because I think they add some cool opportunities. And this text label will take over the quantity from this item sprite. So in this texture rec, an item sprite, we're gonna go ahead and do an onReady var. This means that once item sprite is added to the scene tree, it'll grab this reference to rich text label, and we don't have to look for it every time that we want to call it out. Now an item class, this is another beauty of using resources, because resources, unlike JSONs or HTML files, they can have functions with them. So let's go ahead and make a function add quantity. Make it an integer, and all we're going to do here is quantity plus equals added quant. That means that we're adding added quant to quantity. Plus equals just means this variable plus this one equals this. So now we have a function that we can call out anytime. So in item sprite, we could say this function echoes what we see in item class, yes. But instead of adding it straight to quantity, we'll call out my item, add quantity, added quant. Now this function will call this function in the item class and the resources that it inherits from, and we'll add that quantity. So I've gone ahead and set up a few more lines in the item sprite itself. So we're gonna go over what I just did. So setGets are basically a fancy way of letting you set something to this variable and automatically without defining extra functions. So we have setGet and we have the setItem function. So this will be called anytime my item is updated. Now, setItem is this function. You pass in a new item and it's of type resource. And the reason that we didn't do type item, which we could have done, is because in Godot 3, unfortunately, we cannot export custom user variables. Hopefully this will be implemented in Godot 4. That remains to be seen. There's been some literature talking about it, but I don't think everyone agrees with it quite yet. So, in here, it's important to set my item to the new item. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set self texture, which calls out this variable, the texture variable in the texture rect, is equal to my item. And just realized I forgot a little function. Let's add a getter. It's always important to use getters and setters because then it makes things more thread safe this way. And if something in an item class is accessing item texture at the same time, it's going to run into some issues. So function calls are deferred automatically within one thread, because the thread can only be doing one thing at one time. So we're going to call out this getTexture function. We're going to go into item sprite, and we're going to call this getTexture, which means that we're getting the texture from the item. Now we're setting the texture to that. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Now, I like to make these tools so that you can see what happens in real time in the editor, but it's not completely imperative to do that. Enrich text label, let's go ahead and enable this BB code. And in item sprite, let's set my label. Actually, let's go ahead and just do rich text label for right now because we're not adding it to the scene. We're gonna set rich text label, BB code, text is equal to new item, get quantity. Now you'll notice I didn't make this function. So we're gonna go ahead and duplicate this real quick, change this, and make it return the quantity. Of course, if I was working on my own game, I would be adding large block comments here. Make sure to comment your game, that's very important. Item class, make sure we save it, go over to item sprite, and now we are setting the number of the rich text label to the quantity, and we're setting the texture. So let's go ahead and try this out, shall we? Let's pull the white shirt over here, boom. So now before we go testing any of this, we need to make sure that all of these different resources have a tool property. Now this is a special variable, as I talked about a little earlier, that lets this code run in the editor itself. These tool callouts will not work, unfortunately. They will not be extended, rather. So you have to make sure that you put them in every different inherited class if you want to see this from the editor. These will work within the game. But now we have white shirt. Let's go ahead and toss it in. And now we see that it updated the texture automatically because of our code. Now, we do have filtering issues, so that's something that we need to contend with. And just for the sake of showing how I go about fixing that, I'll do that and re-import it, and now we don't have any fuzzy issues anymore. So we have our shirt. Fantastic. See that we do have an error with the quantity. That's because I forgot to cast this quantity to a string, but that's okay. Like I said, everybody makes mistakes. And now we have this one value. Beautiful. Now we can see the quantity of the item, and the font's a little messed up, so I'd recommend uploading your own font. But for now, we can see that that will change. So now we have an item sprite with this shirt, we have it with the quantity, and from there we can do all manner of things. We could, for instance, attach this to an inventory screen. We could add equipping functions into an inventory. I have singletons in my games that handle inventories, and I put a little setting item here just so I could make sure that set item was getting called. There's so much more that you can do with this, and I would love to expand upon this in the future, maybe in another video, based on any questions that you guys might have. Apologies if this video was a little long. I was kind of improvising as I went through it, and I appreciate you sticking with me through this video. in my own games, I add so many different variables like prices. I add stack flags to determine if you can even have a quantity over 1. I have things like if items are usable, and the like. You can even use these different resources to make drop tables for enemies, to all sorts of things. And in this item sprite, if you wanted to, since these items are local to scene, you can change the quantity, and then you could save that as a new item somewhere else, or you can save it in a save file. So that's about all I have for this tutorial. It's a really good way to organize all of your items, and like I was talking about quite earlier, you could even make folders for different things like food or armor. And you can see all your different armors there, all your different foods. You can add IDs to then search through them, and if you want to, you can even make a editor tool to be able to make new items, which maybe I'll do a little tutorial on if you guys are interested. Anyway, thank you for watching this tutorial. My name is Jacob Fox. I have been an indie game developer for going on a year and a half now, full-time. My debut game, Verdancy Vale, is going to Kickstarter this August of 2022, and I'm hoping to be releasing a lot of art about that very soon. I've been excitedly working on it for a long time. The code is practically finished, and the art is coming along very nicely. It is a farming sim based around magic, and you also use your magic in roguelike dungeons. It juxtaposes things like calming farming gameplay with fast-paced combat, and the story is really something special. So I hope you guys will follow along for that journey. I will post updates to that game here on this YouTube channel, so you're welcome to subscribe and like this video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you've implemented any item mechanics like this, or if you have any suggestions on tutorials that you would like me to do in the future. I've been working on GDScript for, about 2 years now. I know it pretty well, and I come from a computer hardware engineering and software engineering background, academically and professionally, so I have a lot of coding knowledge, though I always have much more to learn. So if you have any more suggestions on how I could make this better even, I could even make some reparations to this video in the future. So I've rambled for quite long enough. You can check out the link to my website down below. If you'd like, you can wishlist my game on Kickstarter. Go ahead and follow that. Follow me on Twitter, all the different things. I appreciate all of you watching this video to this point. You are wonderful, and I hope that you'll stick around for more game dev tutorials and information about my games in the future. Thanks, everyone. I'll catch you around.